Alright, pause for a second. Seriously, just put whatever you're doing on hold. Maybe make yourself a cup of coffee or tea, something that feels a little like comfort. Because what I want to share isn't just some story about a person in the headlines or a name you've seen tossed around on YouTube. It's one of those stories that starts out being about somebody else, but eventually, if you're paying attention, starts to sound suspiciously familiar. It's about what it really takes, what it costs, to try living a life with meaning, and what's left behind when the very person handing you the survival guide ends up lost himself. I don't need to explain who Jordan Peterson is. The name rings a bell for almost everybody. You might have watched his videos. Maybe your kid or your brother or your cousin went through a phase of quoting him at every meal. You could have come across one of his books in an airport bookstore. Or maybe you just remember him as that fierce Canadian professor everyone was arguing about a few years back. Until one day, almost overnight, he slipped out of view. That silence, that strange vanishing act, that's what I want you to understand. Here's what happened. In 2025, Peterson landed in intensive care. His daughter, Michaela, later called those weeks a brush with death. For a stretch of almost a month, this man, whose words for years reached millions through screens and speakers in pages, couldn't even speak to his own family. The same person who spent decades tossing lifelines to people on the brink, helping them find their way out of suffering, now found himself unable to even say a word. And that image, honestly, just won't get out of my head. I keep circling back to it because Peterson's whole thing, his whole identity, the core of his advice, was about finding meaning in pain, standing up straight and hauling your load, staring into the abyss without backing down. It was in every lecture, every book, every late-night talk with a desperate patient. He believed in it so much that you almost believed he was untouchable, until his own body called his bluff. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like the thing you trusted most, the thing you built your life on, just turned on you? If you have, tell me about it, because that's the heart of what's going on here. As you follow the story, I'm almost certain something inside you is going to stir. Maybe not what you expect. But let's not start with a hospital bed. To understand how a person gets lost, you first have to know where he came from. Peterson's story begins in a place more ordinary than you could dream up. So normal, it almost circles back to remarkable. Fairview, Alberta, way up in Canada. It's not the sort of town that's famous for anything except for being cold. Cold enough that winter feels less like a season and more like a landlord. In places like that, ambition freezes. It's not that the people aren't smart, it's just that the cold sometimes makes moving forward feel pointless. Jordan Peterson was born in Edmonton in 1962, but grew up in Fairview. Money wasn't part of his childhood. Neither was influence. What the Petersons actually had was something you don't see in every household: books. And parents who cared more about stories and ideas than about where those ideas came from. His dad, Walter, taught at the local school. His mom, Beverly, held down the fort at the college library. They didn't just show up, they paid attention. In a place where a kid could easily drift through life without ever feeling that hunger for ideas, Peterson got lucky. A school librarian named Sandy Notley crossed his path. Little bonus trivia: Notley's daughter would later become Alberta's premier. But the important thing? This librarian didn't hand out Nancy Drew or comic books. She sent Jordan home with Solzhenitsyn, Orwell, Huxley, Ayn Rand. These books, if you've read them, aren't easy. They're the kinds of stories and arguments that stare human darkness right in the face. Totalitarianism, ideology, the kind of suffering that's manufactured by other people. And Peterson, this teenager in the middle of a frozen prairie, dove into every single one. Those books did something to him. The kind of impression that leaves a crack, something that doesn't quite heal. So now, I'll flip the question on you. What was the book, or maybe just the idea, that made you realize the world wasn't simple? If you're willing, leave it in the comments. For Peterson, those early stories took him down a road he hadn't planned on, and nothing was the same afterward. By high school, he was swept up in student activism, joining a left-wing political party, like a lot of idealistic young people do. He believed good policies could fix the world. But the more he read about the bloody disasters of the 20th century, and the more he saw how grand ideas could end in unthinkable suffering, the more he started questioning everything, It wasn't about which side was right. It was about why humans, even with the best intentions, turn toward chaos and cruelty. That question got under his skin. He bailed on the party at 18, not because he lost hope, but because ordinary answers just didn't cut it for him anymore. He went to Grand Prairie Regional College, then switched to the University of Alberta. He finished with a degree in political science in 1982, but that wasn't enough. Political science only skimmed the surface. It couldn't answer the big, messy human questions that kept him up at night. Stuff like, why do people follow monsters? What makes a person cross the line into true evil? What makes a life worth living instead of just dragging on day after day? Psychology, he figured, might actually have answers. So back to school he went. Bachelor's degree in psychology, 1984, then a PhD at McGill in Montreal, studying with one of the world's top researchers on addiction and aggression. His thesis? It explored what makes someone vulnerable to alcoholism. He wasn't collecting degrees for the yard sign. He was building, one brick at a time, painfully, slowly, a way to map the human mind at its darkest. By 1991, he had a doctorate, and not long after, the call came from Harvard. From 1993 to 1998, Peterson worked and taught at one of the world's most elite universities. Back then, nobody considered him some wild celebrity or lightning rod. He was just this intense, relentless academic. One former student, who later became a novelist, called him the most influential teacher he'd ever had. This person who made you feel that ideas were alive and dangerous, that the way you saw the world truly shaped the way you lived in it. In 1998, he came back to Canada. University of Toronto faculty, part-time private practice, hour after hour of lectures about mythology, psychology, and how we humans find, or lose, meaning. In 1999, he published Maps of Meaning, The Architecture of Belief. It's a dense, challenging piece of work. Took him 13 years to write, but it chased a kind of grand, unified theory about how humans cling to meaning when chaos threatens to swallow everything. It didn't sell millions or land him on bestseller lists. For a while, barely anyone noticed. But if you were paying attention, you'd see the ideas were already buzzing, landing. Peterson, the quiet Fairview kid who read heavy Russian novels while snow pressed against the windows, was on his way to becoming somebody whose message the world eventually couldn't overlook. Attention from the world, though, always comes with a price, one that no one had written down yet, and nobody really explained. Jump ahead to fall 2016. Peterson, for the better part of 2 decades, played by academia's rules, publish, teach, treat patients, build his ideas bit by bit, like he wanted them to outlast him. Then he uploads a video to YouTube. Actually, 3 videos, no fancy production. Just a professor, unscripted, talking straight into a camera about things a lot of people whispered privately but didn't dare to say out loud in public. He called them Professor Against Political Correctness. His message: he wouldn't use government-mandated gender-neutral pronouns at the University of Toronto. At that time, Canadian lawmakers were close to passing legislation adding gender identity and expression to the Human Rights Act as protected categories. But Peterson's fight, at least the way he framed it, didn't target any person in particular. It was about speech, about whether a country should ever force people, by law, to say certain things or face consequences. And that, as you probably remember, is where things really start to get complicated. He called it the start of something he'd seen before: ideological policing, the kind that wrecked whole societies in the last century. That's what his entire career had been built on, digging through the rubble of the past, warning about the dangers. But those warnings? Suddenly they weren't just academic. The university threatened him. Student activists showed up, grilling him in public. Faculty unions slammed him in statements. And, of course, the internet did what it does best: turned everything into a wildfire. The videos went viral, racking up hundreds of thousands of views in just weeks. In no time, his monthly Patreon income skyrocketed from a measly $1,000 to over 50 grand. Letters started pouring in, from everywhere, especially young men, but women too, people from every walk of life. Most of them said pretty much the same thing: I thought I was alone in feeling this way. Now, let's take a minute and actually wrestle with this question because it's worth it. Should the law ever force you to use certain words? Is that crossing a line for you or not? That question, the one about the boundaries of compelled speech, tore the country in half. It's wild to think that it launched one of the most unlikely intellectual careers of our time. I honestly want to know what you think. Drop it in the comments. Peterson never flinched. Not from the university, not from reporters swarming for a story, not from activists shouting him down. He was right in the eye of the storm, steady and unshaken. For some, he looked heroic, a kind of stoic leader. For others, that calmness made them furious, like he was stubborn or arrogant. But the more people pushed back, the more visible he became. In 2018, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos, dropped. It wasn't some dense academic text. It wasn't just political ranting either. This book was different, a blend of psychology, mythology, and stories rooted in his decades spent sitting with real people who were suffering. And he wrote it plain. People could actually read it, understand it, see themselves in it. The thing took off. 10 million copies sold. Global tours, podcasts drawing millions of listeners. The New York Times named him a top public intellectual in the West. But when you hit that level of influence, things get messy. Suddenly, people called him everything. Fascist, prophet, you name it. These labels barely lined up with who he really was, sitting alone at his desk. People sliced up his words, turned them into ammunition. He was moving at a pace that's honestly not healthy for anyone. World tours, endless interviews, clinical work, podcasts, university obligations. Behind all the noise, something heavier was weighing on him. A truth nobody in those big crowds ever saw. His wife Tammy got hit with a brutal diagnosis: Bellini duct carcinoma, a rare and aggressive kidney cancer. The word the experts used right out of the gate was terminal. Peterson was juggling worldwide fame in one hand, his family's survival in the other. He never let the audiences see it. For years, he told millions to face their burdens with courage, to find meaning in pain, to withstand what life throws. Now, he was learning firsthand. Some suffering laughs at philosophy. These aren't burdens you can think your way through. They demand something else entirely. In 2019, things reached a tipping point. It started like so many medical disasters do, seemingly harmless. Back in 2016, doctors prescribed Peterson clonazepam, a benzodiazepine for anxiety and muscle tension. Low dose, manageable intent. He was fighting strange physical symptoms from his restrictive diet and the relentless demands of his exploding fame. The meds worked, until they didn't. In 2019, the dose went up, and his body started reacting in unpredictable ways. Benzodiazepine dependence isn't loud or obvious. It sneaks up, rewires how your brain handles fear and calm, then flips the script. Instead of keeping anxiety at bay, it magnifies it, creates a twisted loop of suffering. Withdrawal? Doctors say it's one of the nastiest ordeals the human nervous system can face. Peterson tried to quit. The darkness that followed was absolute. The man who'd spent years analyzing pain from a safe clinical distance was drowning in it. Take a second and really consider that. Ever been betrayed by something you thought was helping you? A pill, a belief, a relationship that held your life together until it fell apart. That's exactly what hit Peterson in 2019. What he did next took everyone off guard. Meanwhile, Tammy's cancer came back. By late 2019, Peterson's family made a choice that shocked the world. They flew to Moscow. They said North American doctors refused the treatment he needed, a medically induced coma, to let his nervous system reset without the torture of conscious withdrawal. Unorthodox doesn't begin to cover it. Medical circles were nervous, skeptical. But when they got to Russia, things got even worse. He developed pneumonia in both lungs. His body, already battered, now faced another enemy. They went ahead and put him under. Peterson spent 8 days in a coma, then 4 weeks in intensive care. He lost motor function, couldn't move properly. The guy who commanded stadiums, out-argued anyone with brutal clarity, was fighting for basic movement. His family took him to Serbia for rehab. Months went by, quiet, empty months where the internet buzzed with rumors, but Peterson vanished. In a world used to his voice booming every day, the silence felt deafening. He came back in June 2020, thin and changed. Words came carefully. Movements came slowly. You could still glimpse the old sharpness, but it was wrapped up in something new, fragility, a kind of humility toward the limits of his own body. He said he was back to his old self, but anyone paying attention knew he'd been to the edge, and it left a mark. The edge is real. No amount of philosophy or willpower lets you cross it without consequences. Not even for the man whose life mission was teaching others how to carry their burdens. Survival wasn't victory, it was just the start. By late 2020, Peterson started resurfacing. Lectures, podcast episodes, the same drive. To outsiders, it looked like a comeback. The standard narrative, man endures darkness, man returns, stronger than before. But the real story, hidden from the public, was quieter, more raw, shaping everything that came after. Tammy kept fighting. The cancer that was supposed to end everything backed off, returned, then, almost miraculously, started responding to treatment. Doctors couldn't even fully explain it. She made it through. It wasn't easy. It came with a price. But she survived. And Peterson, battered and changed, kept going. In 2021, Peterson published Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life, and you could feel right away that this book dug deeper than the last one. It wasn't just more advice. It was personal. He explored the hard truth that if you build too much order, too many rules, those things meant to keep you safe can end up trapping you. The walls you put up to shelter yourself can, somewhere along the line, start closing in, suffocating you instead. Around the same time, Peterson stepped away from the University of Toronto, moved on to a conservative media platform as a podcaster, and launched Peterson Academy, an education platform promising serious learning without tuition or gatekeepers. He moved to Paradise Valley, Arizona. His daughter, Michaela, stepped up to run the whole academy. If you watched from the outside, it looked like Peterson was on the rise after everything he'd been through. More creative, more focused, more free. In a way, it was true. But here's the thing. Bodies don't forget. If you've ever been seriously ill, you'll know that pushing yourself when you're not recovered isn't free. Time after time the debt gets pushed aside, but it never truly vanishes. It just waits. And when a bill waits long enough, it always comes back around, ready to be paid in full. Fast forward to the summer of 2025. Peterson was doing something so ordinary it barely even counts as a story. Helping clear out his father-in-law's house after a death in the family. Just the type of quiet, practical work we all find ourselves doing at some point, honoring a loved one by packing up their things. There was mold there, not the kind you notice right away, with black stains and a musty stink, but the sneaky, invisible kind that lives in the air and walls and ceilings. It sends out biotoxins so tiny you'll never spot them, and if you're healthy, maybe you get away with it. But Peterson, after years of relentless stress, illness, and medical trauma, didn't have much of a defense left. His body couldn't fight back, and pretty soon, it just gave out. The doctors called it Chronic Inflammatory Response Syndrome, or CIRS. When you get hit by biotoxins and your immune system is already worn thin, it can start to malfunction, fighting not what's hurting you, but you. It's like the security system going haywire and attacking its own house. Inflammation spread through Peterson's organs, unchecked, persistent. No pause button. Just sit with that for a second. The very thing that evolved to protect you starts taking you apart. It's not just a medical story, it's a metaphor. Who hasn't tried to lock down their world, only to realize those defenses started hurting more than helping? In Peterson's case, his own body turned on itself. And it didn't waste any time. The inflammation kept climbing. By late summer, it triggered pneumonia. Pneumonia, on top of a body full of inflammation, led to sepsis, a full-body infection that doctors only ever describe as a race with death. There's no sugarcoating it. You either outpace it or you don't. He ended up in the ICU for nearly a month, cut off from speaking, not just to the world, but even to his own family. His voice, the one millions of people had counted on, fell silent. Michaela, his daughter, kept everyone updated, and she didn't minimize the horror. She said it straight. her father came as close to death as a person can and come back. But it wasn't just one crisis for the Petersons. On that same day, Jordan was rushed to the ICU. Michaela's own newborn was whisked to the hospital with her own life hanging on a thread. 2 generations, father and granddaughter, both nearly lost within the same 24 hours. Michaela called it a spiritual attack. And even if that language doesn't fit you, there's no denying there are moments when pain lines up with such precision, it almost feels like intention. Coincidence just feels too small a word. In the ICU, things got messier. The infection and unending inflammation started to attack Peterson's nerves. Critical illness, polyneuropathy, functions most people never even think about. Like moving your hands or feet suddenly turned unreliable. Imagine a man who's spoken on stages worldwide, suddenly wondering if he's able to lift his arm. By October, things stabilized enough for him to leave the ICU, but he was still hospitalized until December. 5 months, an eternity, spent inside medical walls, fighting through a disorder specialists admit is unpredictable, stubborn, and puts its own timeline above anyone else's hopes. He finally made it home to Arizona, the house meant to be a new beginning. He was alive. No small thing considering how close he'd come to not being. But he wasn't well. Michaela shared updates with the kind of careful honesty people reserve for the hardest truths. Her father wasn't doing well, but he wasn't as bad as before. She asked for patience and prayers, for the simple things, because sometimes hope is all you have left. So now, for the first time, the man who always had the answers, who'd spent years telling others how to shoulder their burdens, found himself left with only waiting. Hoping. That's all. Silence followed. Not the sound of defeat or emptiness, but the hush that falls when someone who's given the world everything has nothing more to give. Not because he won't, but because he simply can't. That's the silence surrounding Peterson now. A hard, complicated quiet. And maybe, strangely, it teaches more than all his speeches ever could, because he didn't choose it. It chose him. As 2026 began, Peterson was home, not in a hospital, and he was alive. For weeks that had been a question, not an assumption. Specialists keep tending to his recovery, the lingering neurological problems, the leftover inflammation, the nerves that heal only as fast as they want. Some days are better, others, not so much. Progress comes with setbacks, and for a person whose whole philosophy hinges on the power of discipline and grit, that's its own kind of suffering. Because some illnesses don't care about human defiance. It forces a tough question on everyone. What do you do when everything you've relied on falls short? When all your old tools, philosophy, discipline, willpower, don't cut it anymore? That's not a question just for Peterson. That's for all of us, sooner or later. What do you lean on when your best isn't enough? I'm genuinely curious what others think. So what's left now? No lectures, no stages, just the basics. His family, Michaela, visiting every day, not for show, but because she wants to be there. No long speeches or grand gestures, just presence. The Peterson Academy rolls on. More courses, a growing app, new projects. Michaela leads it now, and Peterson watches the courses, quietly, from his home. There's something achingly human about that. A builder finally sitting quietly, seeing what he made, for once as a participant, not a leader. Tammy is still with him, as she's been through thick and thin, surviving her own fight with cancer, standing by when Peterson went missing into Russia, weathering storms that could destroy most couples. After 3.5 decades of marriage, through every meltdown and every triumph, the thing that endured, unglamorous but unbreakable, is them, sitting side by side, just getting through. Think about all of this. What really stuck out to you in this story? Which chapter shocked you? Your answer probably says something about what matters to you. Peeling back all the medicine and the drama, Peterson's story is about the price of telling the truth on a big stage. That price isn't just measured in tours or tickets, it gets written into your cells, your nervous system. Cameras don't capture all the costs. The rules he shared weren't wrong. People used them and built better lives. But rules aren't armor, and meaning doesn't heal flesh. No matter how disciplined or brave, you can't outthink or outwill a body that's reached its breaking point. Look at Michaela, battling her own challenges, steady, unflashy, showing up for her father again and again. Presence as philosophy. Look at Tammy, surviving her own impossible fights, still there in the house in Arizona with the husband she met long before his name was known. Ordinary, sacred, just sticking together, just staying. And finally, look at Peterson himself. For years, he argued that suffering isn't just the obstacle on our path, it's the mechanism, picking up your burden, especially the ones you never chose, and carrying them anyway. That's the closest any of us get to real nobility. Now he's doing exactly that. Not on a pedestal, but from a quiet bedroom. There are days when getting out of bed is a battle. Days when the silence is heavier than any applause he ever received. And if you've walked through his journey, from that small Alberta town to Harvard's halls, to the Moscow and Belgrade hospitals, and now to the stillness of Arizona, you know already, there are no guarantees. The map of meaning isn't a route you follow without detours. It's a compass, and no one, not even the man who drew it, gets a shortcut out of the dark. If something in this story echoed with your own life, tap like, subscribe for more, and share in the comments. What's the one lesson, not from Peterson's books, but from his whole life, that you want to keep? Because maybe his greatest lesson isn't written in the rules, it's written in his walking forward, even after they stopped being enough. In the simple act of keeping on, no matter what.